A worn leather wallet sits on a mahogany desk, containing a faded photo of a woman's smile, radiant and full of promise. The image catches the fluorescent light, streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, much like its owner, polished and professional on the surface, yet carrying secrets that no boardroom presentation could ever reveal. The emergency alarm pierced through the 42nd floor of Meridian Tower on a humid Thursday afternoon. Serenity Damaris, the 36-year-old CEO of NextGen Dynamics, maintained her trademark composure as she guided employees toward the stairwells with practiced efficiency. In the maintenance department 20 floors below, Rowan Estmere was reviewing safety protocols when the building's power grid suddenly failed. The 43-year-old facilities coordinator had seen many emergencies, but nothing could have prepared him for what would happen when he and the untouchable CEO found themselves trapped between floors, where desperation would shatter every wall they'd built around their hearts, leading to a confession that would change everything. "If we die here, know that I love you." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow through the executive elevator as it lurched to a sudden stop between the 38th and 39th floors of Meridian Tower. Serenity Damaris pressed the emergency button repeatedly, her usually steady hands trembling slightly as the reality of their situation set in. The building's power grid had failed during what appeared to be a routine maintenance check, leaving her trapped with a man she had never formally met despite seeing him countless times in the hallways. Rowan Estmere stood against the opposite wall, his facilities coordinator uniform wrinkled from a long day of inspections. His calloused hands gripped the emergency phone, but the line remained dead. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably as both processed their predicament. Outside they could hear the distant sounds of emergency vehicles, but inside their metal box suspended in space they were utterly alone. "The backup generators should kick in within 15 minutes, Rowan said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. He had dealt with building emergencies before, but never while trapped with the company's notoriously private CEO. Serenity nodded, straightening her tailored blazer as if preparing for a board meeting rather than acknowledging their potential peril. "I'm sure you're right," she replied, though her voice carried a slight tremor. The confined space felt smaller by the minute, and memories she had spent years suppressing began to surface. The walls seemed to close in, triggering something deep and primal within her carefully constructed composure. Rowan noticed her breathing had become shallow and rapid. Years of caring for his teenage daughter Iris had taught him to recognize the signs of panic, even when someone was trying to hide it. "Are you claustrophobic?" he asked gently, moving slightly closer but maintaining a respectful distance. Serenity's laugh came out sharp and brittle. "Among other things," she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. She had built her entire career on projecting strength and control, yet here she was, vulnerable in front of a man whose first name she had only just learned from his badge. The elevator shuddered slightly, causing both of them to instinctively reach for the walls. In that moment, their eyes met properly for the first time. Rowan saw past the CEO facade to something raw and frightened underneath. Serenity glimpsed a kindness in his brown eyes that she hadn't encountered in her corporate world for years. "Tell me about your daughter," Serenity said suddenly, desperate for distraction. She had seen the photo on his badge, a smiling teenager with bright eyes and an infectious grin. "Iris, isn't it?" Rowan's entire demeanor softened at the mention of his daughter. "She's 15, brilliant, and currently convinced that she's going to revolutionize marine biology," he said with evident pride. "Ever since she was small, she's been fascinated by ocean life. Our apartment is filled with books about coral reefs and deep-sea creatures." "That's remarkable," Serenity said, and she meant it. "Most teenagers are more interested in social media than saving the ocean." She paused, remembering her own teenage years spent in libraries, hiding from foster families who never quite understood her drive to succeed. "Iris is different," Rowan continued, his voice warming as he spoke about his daughter. "She lost her mother when she was 8, and somehow channeling that grief into caring for other living things became her way of healing. She volunteers at the aquarium every weekend, and has already been accepted to several marine biology summer programs." The mention of loss hung in the air between them. Serenity felt something twist in her chest, a recognition of shared pain that she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "Losing someone that important must have been devastating for both of you." Rowan studied her face, noticing how her professional mask had slipped further. "It was, but we found ways to support each other through it. Iris taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry love instead of just pain." Before Serenity could respond, the elevator lurched again, this time more violently. The emergency lights flickered,
plunging them into complete darkness for several terrifying seconds before the dim illumination returned. Serenity's sharp intake of breath echoed in the small space, and without thinking, Rowan moved closer. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly. "The cable systems have multiple backups. We're safe, just stuck." His presence, solid and calm, anchored her spiraling thoughts. "What about you? Do you have family worried about you right now?" The question hit harder than Serenity expected. "No," she said simply, then felt compelled to elaborate. "I mean, there are people who depend on me professionally, but no one who would notice if I didn't come home tonight." The admission hung between them, raw and honest in a way that surprised them both. Rowan felt his heart clench at her words. He recognized the particular type of loneliness that came from success built on solitude. "That must be difficult," he said carefully, "being responsible for so many people's livelihoods while having no one to share the weight of that responsibility." Serenity laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I chose this life," she said, "built it deliberately. Actually, dependencies and attachments just create weaknesses, opportunities for disappointment." She touched the small pendant at her throat unconsciously, a nervous habit she'd developed years ago. "Iris would disagree with you about that," Rowan said gently. "She says that the strongest ecosystems are the ones with the most connections. The coral reefs she studies survive because everything is interconnected, supporting each other." "Your daughter sounds wise beyond her years," Serenity admitted. "I used to think like that, before I learned that connections could be severed without warning." She caught herself revealing too much, and attempted to rebuild her professional demeanor. But Rowan had already seen past the facade. "What happened to you?" he asked simply, his voice carrying no judgment, only gentle curiosity. The question hung in the air as the elevator creaked softly around them. Serenity stared at the floor numbers above the door, watching them remain stubbornly unchanged. In the red glow of the emergency lighting, with nowhere to run and no meetings to escape to, she felt the walls she had spent decades building begin to crack. "I was 12 when my parents died in a car accident," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "One day I had a family who loved me, and the next day I was alone in a system that saw me as a burden to be managed." She looked up at Rowan, surprised by the compassion in his eyes. "I learned very quickly that counting on people was a luxury I couldn't afford." Rowan understood now why she had built such careful distance around herself. "But you've created something incredible," he said, gesturing toward the elevator doors that represented the empire she had built. "Next-gen dynamics has revolutionized how buildings integrate sustainable technology. Thousands of people have jobs because of your vision. Success is a poor substitute for connection," Serenity said, surprising herself with the admission. "But it's safer. Achievements can't abandon you the way people can." The elevator shuddered once more, and this time the lights went out completely. In the absolute darkness they could hear each other breathing, two strangers suspended between floors and between the lives they had built, and the vulnerabilities they rarely acknowledged. "Rowan," Serenity's voice was smaller now, the CEO authority stripped away by darkness and fear. "I'm here," he said immediately. "I'm not going anywhere." 2 hours passed in the darkness before emergency lighting flickered back on, casting everything in that same unsettling red glow. Serenity had spent those hours in the corner, knees drawn up, methodically working through breathing exercises she had learned in therapy years ago. The confined space had awakened memories she usually kept locked away, and now they demanded attention. "Better?" Rowan asked, noting how her posture had relaxed slightly when the lights returned. He had remained quietly supportive during her panic, offering steady conversation when she needed distraction and comfortable silence when words felt like too much. "Marginally," Serenity admitted, straightening her blazer once again. But the careful facade felt thinner now, less sustainable in their shared predicament. "I should probably explain why small spaces affect me so severely." She didn't owe him an explanation, but something about his patient presence made her want to share what she had never told anyone in her professional life. "After my parents died, I was placed with the Hendersons, a foster family in suburban Chicago. They seemed nice enough during the initial meetings, but they had 7 other foster kids in a house meant for half that number." Rowan listened without interrupting, recognizing the weight of what she was sharing. He had learned from Iris that sometimes people just needed to be heard without having their pain immediately fixed or minimized. "The younger ones got bedrooms, but us older kids were housed in the converted basement," Serenity continued, her voice taking on the flat tone people use when recounting trauma. "It was essentially a concrete box with small windows near the ceiling, and a space heater that barely worked. During Chicago winters, we would huddle together under whatever blankets we could find."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She touched her pendant again, a thin gold chain with a small key that Rowan had noticed her fidgeting with throughout their time in the elevator. "This key belonged to my mother's jewelry box. It's the only thing I kept from my life before the accident. I used to clutch it during those nights in the basement, pretending it could unlock a door back to my real family." "How long were you there?" Rowan asked gently. 2 years. I was brilliant academically, but emotionally I was falling apart. The social workers kept promising it was temporary, that they were looking for a more suitable placement, but suitable families don't typically want angry 12-year-olds who have trust issues and night terrors. Serenity shifted position, trying to find comfort in the cramped space. The Henderson house had rules about basement access. We weren't allowed upstairs except for meals and supervised homework time. If you misbehaved, you lost upstairs privileges entirely. I once spent 4 days straight in that basement because I had questioned why the older kids received smaller meal portions. Rowan felt anger rising in his chest at the injustice she had endured, but he kept his expression neutral. Getting upset on her behalf wouldn't help her process these memories. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort, Serenity continued. It was the powerlessness, having no control over my environment, my schedule, even my access to basic things like natural light or privacy. I promised myself that once I was old enough to leave, I would never again put myself in a position where someone else controlled my circumstances. Is that why you became an entrepreneur rather than working for someone else? Rowan asked, beginning to understand how her childhood had shaped her adult choices. Partly, she nodded. But it goes deeper than that. I studied business and technology because they felt predictable. Markets have patterns, innovations follow logical progressions, and success comes from strategy and execution rather than the whims of people who might decide they don't want you anymore. She looked around the elevator, irony not lost on her that she was once again trapped in a small space beyond her control. When I started Next Gen Dynamics, I was 26 and convinced that I could build a life where I never had to depend on anyone again. Every decision I made was designed to increase my independence and security. That must have been exhausting, Rowan observed. Always having to be the one in control, never allowing yourself to trust anyone else's support. Serenity considered this. It was, but it worked. I built exactly the life I wanted, successful, stable, and completely under my control. I have an apartment that's beautiful and peaceful, a company that reflects my values, and enough financial security that I'll never again have to worry about someone else determining my living situation. But you're also alone, Rowan said gently. Not as a criticism but as an observation. Alone is safe, Serenity replied automatically, then caught herself. Or at least it was until about 3 hours ago when I realized that all my careful independence means nothing if I die in an elevator with someone who barely knows my name. The vulnerability in her admission surprised them both. Serenity had spent so many years projecting strength that acknowledging fear felt like stepping off a cliff. I know more about you now than most people who've worked with you for years, I'd guess, Rowan said softly. And what I know is that you survived something that would have broken many people, and you used that survival to build something meaningful. Next-Gen's sustainability focus comes from those basement years, Serenity admitted. I became obsessed with creating buildings that prioritize human comfort and environmental health because I spent so much time in spaces that did neither. Every green building we design has extensive natural light requirements and emergency systems that prioritize human dignity. So your company isn't just successful, it's healing, Rowan realized. You're using your business to fix the things that were broken in your own experience. Serenity had never framed it that way, but she recognized the truth in his words. I suppose I am, though I never consciously connected those dots until just now. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing the weight of what she had shared. The elevator felt less like a trap and more like a confessional, a space removed from their normal lives where honesty felt possible. What happened to the other kids? Rowan asked eventually. The ones you shared the basement with. I lost touch with most of them when I aged out of the system, Serenity said sadly. Foster care doesn't exactly build lasting relationships, but I've tried to find ways to give back. NextGen funds several programs for youth aging out of foster care, and we have internship programs specifically designed for kids from non-traditional backgrounds. Does it help? Knowing that you're changing the experience for others, Serenity considered the question. Yes and no. It feels meaningful to know that some other 18-year-old won't have to figure out college and career planning completely alone. But it doesn't erase the years I spent feeling invisible and unwanted. Maybe that's not the point, Rowan suggested. Maybe the point isn't to erase your own pain, but to transform it into something that serves others. Is that what you did, after losing your wife? Rowan was quiet for a long moment. I'm still figuring that part out, he admitted. But watching Iris channel her grief into caring for ocean life has taught me that pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of a different kind of purpose. Serenity felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tension she had carried for so long that she had forgotten it was there. I've spent so many years protecting myself from feeling that kind of loss again that I never considered what I might be missing by staying so isolated. What do you think you're missing? Rowan asked. This, she said simply, gesturing between them. Conversation that goes deeper than quarterly reports and market projections. Someone asking how I'm really doing rather than just whether the latest project is on schedule. The elevator creaked softly around them, a reminder of their unusual circumstances, but neither felt as trapped as they had hours earlier. Instead, the confined space had become a cocoon for transformation, a place where carefully constructed walls could safely come down. Your turn, Serenity said softly, as their conversation lulled.
The emergency lighting had dimmed further, creating an even more intimate atmosphere in their suspended refuge. "You know more about my past than anyone in my professional life. It seems only fair that I understand what brought you to Meridian Tower's maintenance department." Rowan leaned back against the elevator wall, considering how much to reveal. Like Serenity, he had become expert at presenting a simplified version of his life to the world. The narrative was easier: devoted single father who chose stability over ambition for his daughter's sake. The reality was far more complicated. 8 years ago, I was a senior software architect at Dynamics Corp downtown, he began, using the company's old name that predated its merger. I was 35, married to Elena, and we had just bought our first house in Lincoln Park. I was on track for a VP position. Elena was teaching marine biology at Northwestern, and we were planning to start a family. He pulled out his wallet, showing Serenity a worn photo tucked behind his ID. A woman with kind eyes and an infectious smile stood next to a younger version of Rowan on what appeared to be a beach vacation. Elena was brilliant. She had just secured a grant to study coral reef restoration in the Pacific, and I was convinced I was the luckiest man alive. "She's beautiful," Serenity said, studying the photo. "You both look so happy." "We were," Rowan nodded. Elena had this way of finding wonder in everything. She could spend hours watching tide pools, explaining the symbiotic relationships between different species like she was describing magic. When she got pregnant with Iris, she immediately started planning how to teach her about ocean conservation from birth.
His voice caught slightly, and Serenity noticed his hands tighten around the wallet. "What happened?" "Preeclampsia," Rowan said simply. "Elena developed severe complications during the pregnancy. The doctors managed to deliver Iris safely at 32 weeks, but Elena's condition deteriorated rapidly afterward. She had a massive stroke when Iris was just 6 weeks old." Serenity felt her heart clench. "I'm so sorry. The first 2 years were a blur," Rowan continued. "Iris was in the NICU for months, and I was trying to balance constant hospital visits with maintaining my career. My company was understanding initially, but software development doesn't pause for personal crises. I started missing deadlines, declining travel assignments, and turning down projects that required long hours." He stared at the elevator floor, lost in the memories. "Elena survived the stroke, but she needed round-the-clock care. The woman who used to lecture about complex ecosystem relationships could barely remember our names on good days. The medical bills were staggering, even with insurance." "How did you manage it all?" Serenity asked, recognizing the impossible weight he had carried.
"Badly at first,"
Rowan admitted. "I was trying to be everything to everyone, and failing spectacularly. Iris needed a parent who was present and attentive, Elena needed an advocate who could navigate the healthcare system, and my job needed someone who could focus on code architecture for 12 hours a day. Something had to give," Serenity observed. "My performance at work suffered dramatically. I was passed over for the VP promotion, then placed on a performance improvement plan. The irony was that my technical skills were still excellent, but I couldn't give the company the total commitment they expected. They wanted someone whose personal life wouldn't interfere with their professional obligations." Serenity recognized the impossible choice he had faced. "You chose family. I chose what mattered most," Rowan corrected gently. "But it wasn't easy. I had to take a lower-paying facilities position at a different company to get the flexible schedule I needed. The pay cut was substantial, and it meant giving up the career trajectory I had worked toward for 15 years. Do you regret it?" Rowan considered the question carefully. "I regret that the choice was necessary. I regret living in a system where caring for family is seen as a professional liability, but I don't regret choosing Iris and Elena over corporate advancement." "How long was Elena sick?" Serenity asked gently. 3 years, Rowan said quietly. 3 years of hoping for improvement that never came, of explaining to a toddler why mommy couldn't read bedtime stories anymore, of learning to navigate insurance denials and medical equipment and therapy schedules." He was quiet for a long moment before continuing. "Elena died when Iris was 4, complications from another stroke. By then Iris barely remembered her mother as anything other than the quiet woman in the hospital bed who sometimes smiled when she heard her voice. That must have been devastating for both of you." "It was, and it wasn't," Rowan said thoughtfully. "The actual death was almost a relief after watching her suffer for so long, but suddenly I was alone with a 4-year-old who had questions I couldn't answer and needs I barely understood how to meet." "How did you learn to be a single parent?" "Trial and error, mostly. Elena's parents lived in Seattle and weren't involved much. My parents had passed away years earlier. I had to figure out everything from scratch: daycare logistics, doctor appointments, playdates, emotional support." Rowan smiled slightly. "Iris taught me as much as I taught her. She was remarkably resilient, probably because she had never known life to be different. To her, having one parent who worked maintenance jobs and cooked macaroni and cheese for dinner most nights was just normal. But it wasn't what you had planned for your life," Serenity observed. "Nothing about my life went according to plan," Rowan agreed.
But I discovered things about myself I never would have learned otherwise. I found out I was good at braiding hair, that I could function on 4 hours of sleep for months at a time, and that there's a particular kind of satisfaction in solving practical problems that make people's daily lives better. Is that why you stayed in facilities management, even after Iris got older? Partly, but I also realized I genuinely enjoyed the work. Software architecture is intellectually challenging, but building maintenance affects real people in immediate ways. When I fix a heating system, families stay warm that night. When I ensure elevator safety systems work properly, people get home to their loved ones. Serenity felt a pang of recognition. You found meaning in taking care of people. I found meaning in taking care of things that take care of people, Rowan corrected. It's different from direct caregiving, but it serves the same purpose. I make sure the infrastructure works, so that other people can focus on their important relationships and meaningful work. Do you ever miss the intellectual challenge of software development? Sometimes, Rowan admitted, but I've found other ways to stay intellectually engaged. I help Iris with her advanced science projects. I read extensively about building systems and energy efficiency, and I've actually been developing some ideas for integrating smart technology into facilities management. Really? What kind of ideas? Rowan's face lit up slightly. Predictive maintenance systems that use IoT sensors to identify problems before they cause emergencies. Imagine if this elevator malfunction could have been predicted and prevented days ago based on subtle changes in motor performance or cable tension. That's actually brilliant, Serenity said, her business mind immediately recognizing the potential. Building owners would pay significant money for that kind of predictive capability. I've been sketching out concepts in my spare time, Rowan said, then caught himself. Not that I have much spare time with Iris's school schedule and activities. Tell me about her, Serenity said. What's she like now? Rowan's entire demeanor softened. She's 15, whip-smart, and absolutely determined to save the ocean. She inherited Elena's passion for marine biology, and has somehow managed to avoid the teenage angst that most of her classmates are experiencing. That's remarkable. Most teenagers are more interested in social media than environmental conservation. Iris is different. She volunteers at the Shed Aquarium every weekend. She's already been accepted to 3 different marine biology summer programs, and she's currently working on a research project about microplastics in Lake Michigan. She sounds exceptional. She is, Rowan said with evident pride, but she's also just a normal teenager who likes terrible pop music and spends too much time on her phone. The difference is that she has a sense of purpose that most kids her age haven't discovered yet. Where do you think that came from? Losing Elena taught her that life is fragile and precious, Rowan said thoughtfully. She channels that understanding into protecting things that can't protect themselves. It's her way of honoring her mother's memory while building something positive from loss. Serenity felt something shift in her understanding. She learned to transform grief into purpose. Exactly. And she's taught me that healing doesn't require forgetting or moving on. It requires finding new ways to carry love forward. 6 hours into their confinement, Serenity had removed her blazer and high heels, sitting cross-legged on the elevator floor in a way that would have scandalized her board of directors. Rowan sat across from her, their earlier formality completely abandoned. The emergency lighting had stabilized, casting everything in a warm amber glow that felt almost cozy despite their circumstances. I should probably tell you something, Serenity said, her voice carrying a note of nervousness that hadn't been there before. I've been having panic attacks since we got trapped, but they're not just about the confined space. Rowan looked up from where he had been sketching building system diagrams on the back of a business card, using a pen from Serenity's purse. What else is triggering them? You, she said simply, then quickly clarified when she saw his concerned expression. Not you specifically, but what you represent. I haven't had a genuine conversation with another person in years. The last time I let someone really see me, really know me, they left. Who left? Rowan asked gently. Serenity hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. His name was Jonathan. I met him during my 2nd year of building NextGen. He was an environmental consultant we hired for a major project. Brilliant, passionate about sustainability, and the first person who seemed to understand both my professional vision and my personal drive. She picked at a loose thread on her skirt, avoiding eye contact. We dated for 2 years. I thought I had finally found someone who could handle my intensity, my need for control, my work schedule. I even started imagining a future that included more than just professional success. What happened? He got a job offer in San Francisco, a dream position with a major environmental firm. I expected him to turn it down, or at least to suggest that we figure out how to make it work long distance. Instead, he told me that he had realized our relationship was holding him back from his real goals. Rowan winced. That must have been devastating. The worst part was his explanation, Serenity continued, her voice taking on that flat tone she used when discussing painful topics. He said that loving me felt like being in a business partnership rather than a romantic relationship, that I had never truly let him in, never shown him who I was beneath the CEO persona. Was he right? Serenity looked up at Rowan, surprised by the directness of his question. Partially. I had shown him more of myself than I had shown anyone else, but I held back the parts I thought would make him run. The foster care trauma, the trust issues, the fact that I sometimes went days without meaningful human contact outside of work meetings. So he left because you weren't vulnerable enough, but you couldn't be vulnerable because you were afraid he would leave, Rowan observed. Exactly. And his leaving proved that my instincts were correct. People leave when things get complicated or inconvenient. It's better to maintain emotional distance from the beginning. Rowan was quiet for a moment, processing her words. Can I tell you something that might sound strange? We're trapped in an elevator, having the most honest conversation of my adult life. Strange is relative at this point. In the 6 hours we've been stuck here, you've shown me more authentic emotion and genuine personality than most people share in months of knowing each other. If Jonathan couldn't see who you really were, maybe the problem wasn't that you were holding back. Maybe the problem was that he wasn't paying attention. Serenity felt something crack open in her chest. You think so? I know so. In our conversation tonight, you've been funny, insightful, vulnerable, brilliant, and completely human. If he needed you to be more than that, he wasn't the right person for you. The elevator shuddered slightly, reminding them of their precarious situation, but neither felt the same fear that had gripped them hours earlier. Instead, the movement seemed to emphasize the intimacy of their shared space. Rowan, Serenity said quietly, if we don't get out of here tonight, if something goes wrong with the rescue, nothing's going to go wrong, he said firmly. Emergency crews are working on the power grid, and backup systems will be restored soon. But if something does happen, she persisted, I want you to know that tonight has been the most meaningful conversation I've had in years. You've reminded me what it feels like to be seen as a person, rather than just a position. Rowan felt his heart rate increase. Serenity, I'm serious, she continued, leaning forward slightly. I've spent 8 years building walls to protect myself from exactly this kind of connection, and in one evening, you've managed to show me what I've been missing. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibility. Rowan found himself studying her face in the amber light, noting how different she looked with her hair slightly mussed and her professional armor set aside. She looked younger, softer, but somehow stronger too. You've done the same for me, he admitted. I've been so focused on being everything Iris needs that I forgot I might need things too. Adult conversation, intellectual challenge, someone who understands the weight of responsibility. What are we doing? Serenity asked, but her tone suggested she already knew the answer. I think we're connecting, Rowan said simply, in a way that neither of us expected or planned for. Before either could second-guess the moment, the elevator lurched violently downward. Emergency brakes engaged with a screech of metal, and they were thrown against the walls. The lights went out completely, plunging them into absolute darkness. Serenity, Rowan called out, reaching blindly across the space. I'm here, she responded, her voice shaky but strong. My shoulder hit the wall, but I think I'm okay. Stay where you are, I'm coming to you. In the darkness, Rowan carefully made his way across the small space until his hands found her shoulders. She was trembling, either from shock or fear, and without thinking, he pulled her against his chest. It's okay, he murmured into her hair. The emergency brakes worked. We're stable. Serenity allowed herself to lean into his warmth, abandoning the last pretense of professional distance. Rowan, she whispered against his shoulder. I'm here, he said, his arms tightening around her. I'm not going anywhere. If we die here, she said, her voice barely audible, know that I love you. The words hung in the darkness between them, raw and honest, and completely unexpected. Rowan felt his breath catch, not because the declaration was unwelcome, but because it voiced what he had been feeling but hadn't dared to acknowledge. We're not going to die, he said firmly, pulling back just enough to cradle her face in his hands, even though he couldn't see her in the darkness. But I love you too. Against all logic and practical sense, I love you too. Their lips found each other in the darkness, a kiss that tasted of desperation, and hope, and the particular intimacy that comes from shared vulnerability. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. This is crazy, Serenity whispered. We barely know each other. We know the important things, Rowan replied. We know how the other responds to crisis, what matters most to them, what they're afraid of, and what they hope for. Is that enough? For now it's everything. The emergency lighting flickered back on, less bright than before but steady. They could see each other's faces clearly now, both flushed and wondering at what had just transpired between them. When we get out of here, Serenity said slowly, will this still feel real? I don't know, Rowan admitted, but I'd like to find out. Above them they could hear voices and machinery. The rescue teams had arrived. 3 weeks after their elevator rescue, Serenity found herself doing something completely unprecedented, leaving work early on a Tuesday afternoon. She had canceled her 4 p.m. meeting with the Sustainability Board and rescheduled her call with the Portland development team, all so she could meet Iris Estmere at the Shed Aquarium. The invitation had come through Rowan, carefully worded as a casual suggestion. Iris mentioned that she'd love to show someone her coral restoration project, he had said during one of their lunch meetings. She's been working with the aquarium staff on a research presentation, and she could use feedback from someone with your business expertise. They both knew it was more than that. In the weeks since their elevator experience, Rowan and Serenity had been navigating the delicate transition from crisis-bonded strangers to whatever they were becoming. Coffee meetings had evolved into lunches, and lunches had stretched into early dinners, but they had been carefully dancing around the largest part of Rowan's life, his daughter. Serenity arrived at the aquarium entrance 10 minutes early, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. She had changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on dark jeans and a soft sweater that looked professional enough to maintain her credibility, but casual enough to suggest she understood this was not a business meeting. "Miss Damaris," a bright voice called out. Serenity turned to see a teenage girl approaching with Rowan's warm eyes and an excited smile. "I'm Iris. Dad said you might be able to help me figure out how to present my research to potential donors. Please, call me Serenity," she replied, immediately charmed by the girl's enthusiasm. "And I'm honored that you'd want my input. Your father tells me you're working on something related to coral reef restoration." "Not just restoration," Iris said, her eyes lighting up. "Active regeneration using 3D printed structures and carefully selected symbiotic organisms. Would you like to see?" As they walked through the aquarium, Iris explained her project with the kind of passionate detail that reminded Serenity of Rowan describing his predictive maintenance concepts. The girl had inherited both parents' intellectual curiosity and had channeled it into something remarkable. "This is where I spend most of my volunteer time," Iris said, leading Serenity to a research area behind the main exhibits. "The aquarium staff has been amazing about letting me use their lab space for my project." The setup was impressive. Several tanks containing different experimental coral structures, detailed charts tracking growth rates and symbiotic relationships, and a computer workstation where Iris had been documenting her findings. "Walk me through it," Serenity said, settling onto a stool beside the tanks. "Explain it like I'm someone who wants to fund your research but doesn't understand the science." Iris grinned, clearly delighted to have an engaged audience. "Okay, so the problem with traditional coral restoration is that it's really slow and often unsuccessful. We try to transplant existing coral to areas that have been damaged, but the transplants often don't survive because the environment that killed the original coral is still there." She pointed to one of the tanks containing what looked like geometric structures covered in colorful growth. "My approach is different. Instead of transplanting existing coral, I'm using 3D printed calcium carbonate structures that mimic the complexity of natural coral skeletons but are designed specifically for the environmental conditions of the restoration site." "That's brilliant," Serenity said, and she meant it. "You're essentially creating custom habitat that's optimized for success, rather than hoping natural structures will adapt." "Exactly," Iris said, clearly thrilled that Serenity understood immediately. "And because I can control the structure design, I can create spaces that are perfect for specific symbiotic relationships. Different coral species need different types of algae partners, and different algae need different light conditions and water flow patterns." Serenity studied the tanks more carefully, noting the meticulous data collection and the obvious success of several experimental structures. "This isn't just a science fair project, is it? This is real research with real applications. The aquarium thinks it could be scaled up for actual restoration projects," Iris said proudly. "I'm presenting to a panel of marine biologists next month, and if they approve it, I might be able to publish the results." "At 15? Serenity asked, impressed. "Age doesn't matter if the science is solid," Iris said with a maturity that reminded Serenity of herself at that age. "Though it doesn't hurt that Dr. Martinez, the head of marine research here, knew my mom. She's been really supportive of my work." The mention of Elena created a brief pause in their conversation. Serenity had been wondering how to navigate the presence of Rowan's late wife in their developing relationship, and here was an opportunity to understand that dynamic better. "Your father talks about your mother often," Serenity said carefully. "She sounds like she was an amazing person." "She was," Iris said simply. "I don't remember her as much as I'd like to, but I remember that she was always curious about everything. Dad says I get that from her." She paused, studying Serenity thoughtfully. "He talks about you too, you know." Serenity felt her cheeks warm. "He does. He's been different since you two got stuck in that elevator," Iris observed with the directness that teenagers sometimes possess. "Happier, I think. Like he remembers that he's more than just my dad." The comment was surprisingly insightful, and Serenity recognized the wisdom of someone who had learned to read adult emotions out of necessity. "How do you feel about that?" Iris considered the question seriously. "I think it's good. Dad gave up a lot when Mom got sick, and after she died, he's always made sure I had everything I needed. But I don't think he's taken care of his own needs in years. He's a remarkable father," Serenity said. "He is," Iris agreed. "But I'm going to college in 3 years, and I worry about him being alone. He's too young to spend the rest of his life just being my dad." They worked together for the next 2 hours, with Iris explaining her research methodology, and Serenity helping her think through how to present the business case for scaling the project. Serenity found herself genuinely engaged, not just with the science but with Iris herself.
The girl was brilliant but not pretentious, passionate but practical, and possessed an emotional intelligence that probably came from navigating loss at a young age. She was also clearly protective of her father while being mature enough to recognize his needs as an individual. "Can I ask you something?" Iris said as they were organizing her research notes. "Of course. Are you planning to hurt my dad?" The question was asked without hostility, but with the seriousness of someone who had already watched one parent suffer and disappear. Serenity felt the weight of responsibility in the girl's direct gaze. "I hope not," Serenity said honestly. "I care about him a great deal, and I would never intentionally cause him pain, but you might unintentionally." Serenity appreciated the girl's directness, even as it made her uncomfortable. "I might. I'm still learning how to be in a relationship with someone, and I'm sure I'll make mistakes. As long as you're trying to learn, that's what matters," Iris said pragmatically. "Dad's made plenty of mistakes too, but he always tries to fix them." When Rowan arrived to pick them up, he found them deep in conversation about marketing strategies for environmental research. Serenity was sketching organizational charts on a napkin, while Iris took notes on her phone. "How did it go?" he asked, looking between them with cautious hope. "Your daughter is going to change the world," Serenity said, standing to greet him with a smile that reached her eyes. "And she's taught me more about marine biology in 3 hours than I learned in 4 years of college. She's pretty amazing," Rowan agreed, watching as Iris gathered her research materials with obvious pride in her work. "Dad, Serenity helped me figure out how to structure my presentation for the research panel," Iris said excitedly. "She knows how to talk to people with money so they understand why science matters." "That's wonderful," Rowan said, catching Serenity's eye with a grateful look. "Are you hungry? We were thinking of getting dinner," and Iris wanted to show Serenity her favorite sushi place. "I'd love that," Serenity said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. The afternoon had given her a glimpse of what family life might look like, and instead of feeling trapped or overwhelmed, she felt welcomed. As they walked toward the aquarium exit, Iris fell into step between them, chattering about her research plans and asking Serenity questions about business development. Rowan caught Serenity's hand as they walked, a gesture that felt natural rather than calculated. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking her seriously, for understanding what this means to her." "Thank you for sharing her with me," Serenity replied. "She's incredible, Rowan. You've raised someone truly special. We're both still figuring it out as we go," he said with a smile. "But I think we make a pretty good team." Looking at them together, Serenity felt something she had never expected to experience, the possibility that she might belong somewhere after all. 6 weeks after their aquarium visit, Serenity sat in her corner office, watching the Chicago skyline as snow began to fall. Her assistant had just delivered the quarterly reports, but her attention kept drifting to the small framed photo on her desk, a candid shot Iris had taken of her and Rowan during their dinner at the sushi restaurant. They were both laughing at something Iris had said, their faces relaxed and genuine in a way that still surprised Serenity when she looked at it. The relationship had developed with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. Rowan would stop by her office during his evening maintenance rounds, and they would steal 20 minutes of conversation before he headed home to Iris. Weekends had begun to include family activities, museum visits, walks along Lake Michigan, and quiet dinners where Iris would update them on her research progress while Rowan and Serenity exchanged glances that spoke of growing intimacy. But it was Iris who had truly captured Serenity's heart. The girl's brilliant mind and passionate dedication reminded Serenity of her younger self, but with the emotional security that came from having a loving parent. Watching Rowan with his daughter had shown Serenity what good parenting looked like: supportive without being controlling, proud without being possessive, protective without being limiting, which was why the phone call she had received that morning had affected her so deeply. "Ms. Damaris," Dr. Martinez from the Shed Aquarium had said, "I'm calling about Iris Estmir's research project. As you know, she's scheduled to present to our donor panel next month, and the response has been overwhelmingly positive." "That's wonderful," Serenity had replied, genuinely pleased for Iris. "The challenge is funding for the next phase. Iris wants to expand her trials to include field testing at restoration sites in the Caribbean, but the cost is substantial: travel, equipment, research vessel time, laboratory fees. We're looking at approximately $50,000 for a 6-month pilot program." Serenity had felt her heart sink. She knew Rowan's financial situation well enough to understand that $50,000 might as well be $50 million. His facilities coordinator salary was comfortable enough for their daily needs, but hardly sufficient for funding major research expeditions. "Are there grants available?" she had asked. "We're applying for several, but the competition is fierce, and most foundations prefer to fund established researchers rather than teenagers, regardless of how brilliant they are. Between you and me, Iris's age is working against her, even though her science is solid." After ending the call, Serenity had spent the morning researching marine biology grants and fellowship programs.
What she discovered confirmed Dr. Martinez's assessment. The funding landscape for young researchers was limited and highly competitive. Most opportunities required applicants to be enrolled in graduate programs or have institutional affiliations that Iris wouldn't qualify for until college. But Serenity had resources that could solve this problem immediately. She had built Next-Gen Dynamics specifically to have the flexibility to pursue projects that aligned with her values. The company's charitable foundation had supported various environmental initiatives over the years, and expanding into marine conservation was a natural fit. Iris's research could become the foundation's first major marine biology project, providing both the funding she needed and the institutional backing that would open doors to other opportunities. The more Serenity thought about it, the more perfect the solution seemed. Iris would get to pursue her research without the family facing financial strain. Rowan would see his daughter achieve her dreams, and NextGen would be associated with groundbreaking environmental work. Everyone would benefit. She spent the afternoon working with her foundation director to structure the grant properly. They designed it as a competitive fellowship specifically for promising young marine biologists, with Iris as the inaugural recipient. The program would provide full funding for research projects, mentorship from established scientists, and pathways to publication and conference presentation. We'll announce it as the Elena Estmere Memorial Fellowship for Young Marine Biologists, Serenity told her foundation director. Named after a Northwestern professor who dedicated her career to coral reef research. That's a beautiful tribute, the director agreed. Should we coordinate the announcement with Dr. Martinez at the aquarium? Let me handle the initial communication, Serenity said. I want to make sure the family understands the significance of the opportunity. That evening, Serenity waited for Rowan to finish his maintenance rounds, planning to share the news when he stopped by her office. She had rehearsed the conversation carefully, emphasizing the competitive nature of the fellowship and the alignment with NextGen's environmental mission. She wanted to present it as a professional opportunity rather than personal charity. When Rowan arrived, he looked tired but pleased to see her. "How was your day?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk that had become his usual spot. "Productive," Serenity said, barely able to contain her excitement. "I have some news that I think you and Iris are going to love." She explained the fellowship program, watching Rowan's expression change from curiosity to surprise, to something that looked disturbingly like concern. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. $50,000, he said finally, plus additional funding for publication costs and conference travel, Serenity added, and mentorship from some of the top marine biologists in the country. It's an incredible opportunity. Named after Elena, Rowan said, his voice carefully neutral. I thought that was appropriate, given her background in marine biology. Iris will be carrying on her mother's legacy while pursuing her own research. Rowan stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Serenity felt the first flutter of unease as she watched his posture stiffen. When did you set this up? He asked without turning around. Today. Martinez called to discuss the funding challenges for Iris's next research phase. I knew the foundation could help, and Dr. Martinez called you directly. Rowan interrupted, turning to face her. About my daughter's financial needs? Serenity realized her mistake immediately. He mentioned it in passing when I called to ask about her research progress. I've been following her work since our aquarium visit, and you decided to solve our money problems without discussing it with me first, Rowan said, his voice growing colder. It's not charity, Serenity said quickly. It's a legitimate fellowship program. Iris earned this opportunity through her own merit, a fellowship program that you created today specifically for her, Rowan pointed out. After learning that we couldn't afford to fund her research ourselves, the conversation was spiraling away from Serenity's careful plans. I thought you'd be happy. Iris gets to pursue her dreams without the family facing financial stress. Without the family facing financial stress, Rowan repeated. Do you hear yourself? You've decided that our financial situation is a problem that needs solving by your foundation. That's not what I meant, Serenity protested. But even as she said it, she realized that was exactly what she had meant. Serenity, I've been supporting my daughter on my salary for 11 years. We've never gone without anything essential, and Iris has never felt deprived or limited by our circumstances. But this research opportunity is expensive, yes, and if Iris doesn't get to do the Caribbean fieldwork this year, she'll find other ways to advance her research, or we'll figure out how to fund it ourselves, even if it takes longer. Why would you choose the harder path when there's a simple solution available? Serenity asked, genuinely confused by his reaction. Rowan stared at her for a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Because the simple solution isn't simple for me. It's you using your wealth to fix a problem that you've decided we can't handle ourselves. I never said you couldn't handle it. You didn't have to say it. You heard that we needed $50,000, and your immediate response was to create a fellowship program. It never occurred to you to ask what we wanted to do about it, or whether we had other plans, or whether we were comfortable accepting that kind of help. Serenity felt defensive anger rising in her chest. I was trying to help your daughter achieve something extraordinary. How is that wrong? It's not wrong, but it's not right either, Rowan said, running his hands through his hair. You made a decision about our lives without including us in the decision-making process. That's not partnership, Serenity. That's you managing a problem. So what if it is? She snapped, her professional instincts taking over. I'm good at solving problems. I saw a situation that needed fixing, and I fixed it. Iris gets her research funding, you don't have to stress about money, and everyone wins. Everyone except me, Rowan said quietly. Because now every time Iris achieves something with this research, I'll know it was possible because my girlfriend decided I was too poor to provide for my daughter's dreams. The word girlfriend hung between them, highlighting how undefined their relationship still was despite its intensity. They had been carefully avoiding labels, but the crisis had forced the issue into the open. That's not fair, Serenity said. Your worth as a father has nothing to do with your ability to fund expensive research projects. Tell me honestly, Rowan said, moving closer to her desk. When Dr. Martinez told you about the $50,000 cost, what was your first thought? Serenity hesitated, knowing the truth would hurt him, but unable to lie. I thought about how much that amount means to your family versus how little it means to mine. Right, you thought about our limitations instead of our capabilities. You saw a problem that money could solve, and you solved it the way you solve all your problems, by taking control and managing the outcome. Is it so wrong that I don't want to watch someone I care about struggle with something I could easily fix? Yes, Rowan said firmly. Because struggle isn't always something that needs fixing. Sometimes it's how people build strength and independence and pride in their achievements. Serenity felt tears threatening, which only increased her frustration. I don't understand why you're angry about something that helps Iris. I'm angry because you went behind my back to my daughter's research mentor, and then created a $50,000 solution without once asking me how I felt about it, Rowan said. I'm angry because you've known me for 2 months, and you think you understand our financial situation well enough to intervene. I know that $50,000 would be difficult for your family to manage, Serenity said. Difficult, yes. Impossible, no. I have savings, Serenity. I have investment accounts and retirement funds that could be accessed if necessary. I also have family members who could contribute, and Iris has grandparents who would be honored to support her research. Serenity stared at him, realizing how many assumptions she had made. I didn't know, because you didn't ask. You saw my job title and my apartment, and decided you knew everything about our financial capabilities. I was trying to help, she said, her voice smaller now. I know you were, but help is supposed to be offered, not imposed, and it's supposed to come from understanding what people actually need, not what you think they need. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the misunderstanding settling between them. Serenity felt the familiar urge to retreat, to rebuild the walls that protected her from exactly this kind of interpersonal confusion. What do you want me to do? She asked finally. Cancel the fellowship program. I want you to understand why this hurt, Rowan said. I want you to see that you made decisions about my family without trusting me to be part of the process. I thought I was being thoughtful, solving the problem before it became a source of stress for you. But you weren't thinking about what I might want or need as Iris's father. You were thinking about what you would want if you were in my situation. The observation stung because it was accurate. Serenity had projected her own childhood experiences onto their situation, remembering what it felt like to need help that never came, and wanting to ensure that Iris never experienced that disappointment. You're right, she admitted. I should have talked to you first. Yes, you should have. And more than that, you should have trusted me to handle my daughter's needs appropriately, even if my solutions look different from yours. Rowan moved toward the door, then paused. I need some time to think about this, Serenity. About what it means that your instinct was to manage our problem rather than share it with us. Rowan, please don't leave angry. We can figure this out. I'm not angry anymore, he said, and somehow that was worse than if he had been. I'm just realizing that we might want different things from this relationship. After he left, Serenity sat alone in her office as the snow continued to fall outside. She stared at the fellowship paperwork on her desk, trying to understand how her attempt to help had created such a fundamental rift between them. The solution had seemed so obvious, so generous, so right, but as she replayed the conversation, she began to see it from Rowan's perspective. She had treated him like a problem to be solved rather than a partner to be consulted. She had made assumptions about his capabilities and limitations, without giving him the chance to share his own plans or preferences. Most painfully, she realized she had done exactly what Jonathan had accused her of years earlier. She had approached their relationship like a business transaction, identifying problems and implementing solutions without considering the emotional or personal implications for the people involved. The irony was devastating. In trying to prove that she could be supportive and generous, she had instead demonstrated that she still didn't understand how to be truly intimate with another person. The following morning, Serenity arrived at Meridian Tower, an hour earlier than usual, hoping to catch Rowan during his shift change. She had spent the entire night replaying their argument, and while she still believed her intentions had been good, she could see how her execution had been problematic. An apology felt like the right place to start rebuilding whatever had been damaged between them. But when she reached the facility's office, Rowan's supervisor informed her that he had requested a schedule change, and would be working the overnight shift for the foreseeable future. The message was clear: he was avoiding her. Over the next week, Serenity made several attempts to connect. She sent carefully worded emails that went unanswered, left voicemails that weren't returned, and even stopped by the aquarium, hoping to run into Iris. But the girl was also conspicuously absent from her usual volunteer schedule. The fellowship paperwork remained on Serenity's desk, untouched and increasingly symbolic of her failure to understand the people she cared about most. Her foundation director asked several times about moving forward with the announcement, but Serenity kept postponing, unwilling to proceed without Rowan's blessing. "Just scrap it," she finally told him on Friday afternoon. The Elena Estmir Memorial Fellowship was a mistake. 2 weeks after their fight, Serenity threw herself back into work with the intensity that had built her company. She scheduled back-to-back meetings, accepted speaking engagements she would normally decline, and began personally overseeing projects that her team could have handled independently. Her assistant started booking her calendar in 15-minute increments to accommodate her suddenly frenetic pace. The strategy worked during business hours. Focused on quarterly projections and expansion plans, she could avoid thinking about amber elevator light, or the sound of Rowan's laugh, or the way Iris's eyes lit up when discussing coral regeneration. But evenings and weekends stretched endlessly, filled with the silence she had once treasured, and now found suffocating.
Her waterfront apartment, which had always felt like a peaceful sanctuary, began to feel like an expensive prison. The views that had once inspired her now reminded her of conversations with Rowan about architecture and urban planning. The kitchen that she rarely used made her think of the dinners they had shared, simple meals that had been more satisfying than any business function she had ever attended. 3 weeks into their separation, Serenity made a decision that surprised even her. She scheduled a therapy appointment. Dr. Rebecca Chen's office was nothing like the sterile corporate environments where Serenity usually felt comfortable. Warm lighting, soft furniture, and an absence of sharp angles created a space that invited vulnerability rather than professional posturing. "What brings you here today?" Dr. Rebecca Chen asked, settling into her chair with the patient attention that good therapists cultivate. "I'm having trouble understanding why someone I care about is angry with me for trying to help," Serenity said, then caught herself. "Actually, that's not accurate. I understand why he's angry. I'm having trouble accepting that his anger is justified. Tell me about what happened." Serenity explained the fellowship situation, trying to present both perspectives fairly while still struggling with her belief that her solution had been objectively good for everyone involved. "It sounds like you approached his daughter's funding need the same way you might approach a business problem," Dr. Chen observed. "Exactly. I identified the challenge, developed a solution, and implemented it efficiently. In business, that's considered excellent management, but this wasn't a business situation." "No," Serenity admitted. "It was personal. But I still don't understand why a good outcome achieved through efficient means is somehow problematic." Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, then asked, "How do you think Rowan felt when he learned about the fellowship?" "Grateful, I assumed. His daughter gets to pursue her research dreams without financial stress. What else might he have felt?" Serenity considered the question reluctantly. "Embarrassed, maybe. That I knew about their financial limitations. What else?" "Diminished," she said slowly. "Like I didn't trust him to handle his own family's needs. And how might that connect to his role as a father?" The insight hit Serenity with uncomfortable clarity. Being a good provider is part of how he defines himself as a parent. By solving the funding problem myself, I inadvertently suggested that he wasn't capable of providing for his daughter's opportunities. How do you think that felt for him? Awful, Serenity realized, like I was treating him as inadequate rather than as a partner. "And how did you approach the situation when he expressed these concerns?" Serenity winced, remembering her defensive response. "I focused on the logical benefits of my solution rather than acknowledging his emotional experience." "That's a pattern worth exploring," Dr. Chen suggested gently. "This tendency to prioritize outcomes over process, solutions over collaboration." The session continued for another 40 minutes, with Dr. Chen helping Serenity identify the ways her childhood trauma had shaped her adult relationships. The foster care system had taught her that survival depended on self-reliance and emotional independence. Love felt dangerous because it created opportunities for abandonment. Control felt safer than vulnerability, but control also creates distance, Dr. Chen pointed out. It's difficult to build intimate relationships when you're managing other people's experiences rather than sharing them. "So what do I do now?" Serenity asked. "Rowan won't talk to me, and I'm not sure I blame him. What would acknowledging his perspective look like beyond just understanding it intellectually?" Serenity thought about this for several days after the session. Understanding Rowan's viewpoint was different from accepting it, and accepting it was different from knowing how to repair the damage she had caused. Meanwhile, the absence of both Rowan and Iris created a void in her daily routine that she hadn't anticipated. She realized how much she had begun to look forward to their conversations, how their presence had begun to feel essential rather than simply pleasant. A month after their fight, Serenity was working late when her assistant knocked on her office door. "There's a delivery for you," she said, setting a small package on Serenity's desk. Inside was a handwritten note from Iris and a small glass pendant shaped like a coral structure. The note was brief but devastating in its thoughtfulness. "Dear Serenity,
I heard about the fellowship program you created. I wanted you to know that even though Dad says we can't accept it, I understand why you wanted to help. Thank you for believing in my research. I hope you and Dad can work things out because I miss talking to you about science and business. This pendant is from my first successful coral growth experiment. I wanted you to have it. Love, Iris. Serenity held the pendant up to the light, watching it cast rainbow patterns across her office walls. The gesture was so thoughtful, so generous despite the awkwardness of the situation, that it made her fully understand what she had lost. It wasn't just Rowan she missed. It was the family they had been tentatively building together, the sense of belonging that had begun to develop between them. Iris's note made clear that the girl had been as invested in their relationship as the adults, and that its loss affected her too. That night, Serenity sat in her apartment wearing Iris's pendant and looking at the photo from their sushi dinner. For the first time in her adult life, she allowed herself to fully feel the weight of loneliness, not as a chosen state of independence, but as a consequence of her inability to trust and collaborate with people who cared about her. She thought about calling Rowan, but realized that apologies and explanations wouldn't be enough. The problem wasn't just her handling of the fellowship situation. The problem was her fundamental approach to relationships, her instinct to manage rather than to share, to solve rather than to support. If she wanted to rebuild what they had lost, she would need to become someone capable of true partnership. That transformation couldn't happen overnight, and it couldn't be accomplished through willpower alone. The next morning, Serenity called Dr. Chen to schedule regular weekly appointments. 6 weeks into therapy, Serenity sat in Dr. Chen's office, describing a dream that had been recurring since her separation from Rowan. "I'm back in the elevator, but this time I'm alone," she said. "The lights keep going out, and every time they come back on, the space has gotten smaller. I keep pressing the emergency button, but instead of connecting me to help, it plays recordings of conversations I've had with people I've pushed away. What do the conversations say? Different things. Jonathan telling me I never let him see who I really was. Foster parents explaining why I was being transferred to another home. Rowan saying that I don't know how to be a partner." Serenity paused, remembering the emotional weight of the dream. "But the worst part is that the voice on the emergency phone is mine, telling me that I'm safer alone. What do you think this dream represents? That I've spent my whole life building smaller and smaller spaces where I can feel in control, but the cost is increasing isolation," Serenity said. "And that part of me still believes the isolation is preferable to the risk of being hurt or rejected." Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. "You've been working on identifying these patterns for several weeks now. How does it feel to recognize them so clearly?" "Terrifying and liberating at the same time," Serenity admitted. "Terrifying because it means acknowledging how many relationships I've damaged or avoided. Liberating because understanding the pattern feels like the first step toward changing it." Through therapy, Serenity had begun to understand how her response to childhood trauma had shaped her adult relationships. The foster care system had taught her that love was conditional and temporary, that people would abandon her when she became inconvenient or difficult. Her solution had been to become indispensable through achievement while remaining emotionally unavailable. "I turned myself into a professional success story because successful people don't get abandoned for being burdens," she told Dr. Chen during one session. "But I also made sure never to need anything from anyone, because needing things creates opportunities for disappointment." "And how did this strategy work in your relationship with Rowan?" "At first it felt perfect. He needed someone who understood responsibility and sacrifice, and I needed someone who appreciated achievement and independence. We were both competent adults who could admire each other without requiring vulnerability. But that changed. It changed when I realized I was falling in love with him," Serenity said. "And even more when I started caring about Iris as if she were my own family. Suddenly I had people whose happiness and success mattered to me as much as my own. And that felt dangerous. It felt impossible to manage. I knew how to control my own outcomes, but I couldn't control theirs. The fellowship program was my attempt to use my resources to ensure their success, which would protect me from having to watch them struggle or fail." "So you tried to solve their challenges the same way you had solved your own." "Exactly. But what worked for me as an individual didn't work for us as a family unit. Rowan didn't need a benefactor. He needed a partner. Iris didn't need a savior. She needed an adult who believed in her capabilities without trying to eliminate her obstacles." Dr. Chen had introduced Serenity to the concept of interdependence as distinct from both dependence and independence. In interdependent relationships, people maintain their individual identities and capabilities, while also relying on each other for emotional support, shared decision-making, and collaborative problem-solving. Independence is about not needing anyone, Dr. Chen explained. Dependence is about not being able to function without someone. Interdependence is about choosing to share your life with someone while maintaining your ability to take care of yourself. This framework helped Serenity understand what had gone wrong with Rowan. She had approached their relationship from a position of independence, maintaining control over all major decisions and using her resources to solve problems unilaterally. But healthy partnerships required interdependence, sharing challenges, making decisions together, and allowing each person to contribute their strengths while acknowledging their limitations. "I thought partnership meant being strong enough that I didn't burden anyone else," Serenity realized. "But actual partnership means being vulnerable enough to let someone else help carry the weight." As her therapy progressed, Serenity began making changes in other areas of her life. She started delegating more responsibility to her management team, recognizing that her need to control every aspect of NextGen's operations was another manifestation of her trust issues. She joined a CEO support group where successful business leaders discussed the challenges of balancing professional achievement with personal relationships. Most significantly, she began reaching out to reconnect with people she had pushed away over the years. She called her college roommate, whom she had lost touch with after graduation when maintaining the friendship required more emotional availability than Serenity was comfortable with. She reached out to former colleagues who had tried to develop deeper friendships that she had kept strictly professional. "I'm learning that I have a pattern of ending relationships before people can disappoint or abandon me," she told Dr. Chen. "I've been so afraid of being left behind that I've been leaving first. How does it feel to reconnect with these people?" "Surprisingly good. Most of them remember me more fondly than I expected, and several have said they always wondered what happened to our friendship. It turns out that my assumption that people would be relieved to have less contact with me was often wrong." 3 months into therapy, Serenity made a decision that would have been unthinkable before her elevator experience. She stepped back from day-to-day operations at NextGen to focus on strategic development and personal growth. She promoted her COO to president, retaining her CEO title but shifting her role to long-term vision and external partnerships. "I've been using work to avoid dealing with personal relationships," she explained to her leadership team. "But running a company that values human well-being while neglecting my own emotional development is hypocritical and unsustainable." The change was initially difficult. Without the constant demands of operational management, Serenity had more time to think about what she wanted from life beyond professional success. The silence in her apartment felt different now, less like peaceful solitude, and more like an invitation to consider what might fill the space. She started taking art classes, something she had loved as a young person but abandoned during her drive toward business success. Working with her hands, creating something beautiful rather than just functional, reconnected her with parts of herself that had been dormant for years. "I used to paint when I was in foster care," she told Dr. Chen. "It was one of the few activities that felt completely mine, that no one could take away or critique or use to judge my worthiness. What does it feel like to return to that now? Like remembering a language I used to speak fluently. There's muscle memory there, but also a sense of reclaiming something I sacrificed for the sake of appearing professional and serious." The art classes led to other changes. Serenity joined a hiking group, attended lectures at the local university, and began volunteering at a mentorship program for young people aging out of foster care. Each activity expanded her world beyond the narrow focus of business achievement, and introduced her to people who knew her as Serenity the person rather than Serenity the CEO. "I'm starting to understand the difference between being alone and being lonely," she reflected during one therapy session. "For years I thought they were the same thing, but they're not. I can choose solitude when I need it without isolating myself from meaningful connections." 4 months after her fight with Rowan, Serenity received an unexpected email from Dr. Martinez at the Shed Aquarium. Iris had been selected for a competitive research program that would fund her Caribbean fieldwork through a collaboration between the aquarium and several universities. The opportunity was even more comprehensive than what Serenity's fellowship would have provided, including mentorship, publication support, and college preparation. "I thought you'd want to know that Iris achieved her research goals through her own merit," Dr. Martinez wrote. "She's an exceptional young scientist, and she's learned that persistence and creativity can overcome financial limitations." Reading the email, Serenity felt a complex mix of emotions: joy for Iris's success, pride in the girl's determination, and a deeper understanding of what Rowan had been trying to tell her months earlier. Iris hadn't needed Serenity to solve her funding challenge. She had needed the opportunity to solve it herself, developing resilience and resourcefulness in the process. "I robbed them of the chance to handle their own crisis," Serenity realized during her next therapy session. "Not because they couldn't manage it, but because watching them struggle felt too difficult for me." "What would you do differently now?" "I would ask how I could support them rather than assuming I knew what they needed. I would offer resources while respecting their autonomy to make decisions about their own lives, and if they had chosen to struggle rather than accept help, I would have to trust their judgment and be available for support without trying to control the outcome." This insight marked a turning point in Serenity's therapy. She began to understand that love sometimes meant allowing people to face their own challenges, offering support without removing agency, and trusting that the people she cared about were capable of handling their own lives. "I thought protecting people from difficulty was how you showed love," she told Dr. Chen. "But actually, believing in people's ability to handle difficulty is much more loving." As winter melted into spring, Serenity found herself thinking often about Rowan and Iris, wondering how they were doing, and whether Iris was excited about her upcoming research opportunity. She had kept the coral pendant on her desk as a reminder of the connection they had shared and the mistakes she had made, but now, instead of the pendant representing loss and regret, it had become a symbol of possibility. If she had learned to approach relationships differently, if she had developed the capacity for true partnership rather than well-intentioned management, maybe she could find a way to rebuild what had been damaged. The question was whether Rowan would be willing to give her that chance. 5 months after their separation, Serenity was leaving her art class when her phone buzzed with an unexpected call from Dr. Martinez at the Shed Aquarium. She almost didn't answer, unsure whether she was ready for news about Iris's research program, but something in her gut told her to pick up. "Serenity, I'm sorry to call so late," Dr. Martinez said, his voice tight with stress. "We have a situation with Iris's research presentation tomorrow, and I wasn't sure who else to contact." "What's happened?" Serenity asked, immediately alert. The primary investor for her Caribbean research program, the Henderson Foundation, had a major financial scandal break this afternoon. Their entire grant program is being suspended pending investigation. Iris is supposed to present to their board tomorrow morning, but now there's no funding to present for. Serenity felt her heart sink. How is she handling it? Not well. She's been working for weeks preparing this presentation, and Rowan is beside himself trying to figure out alternatives. The timing couldn't be worse. Most other funding cycles closed months ago. Serenity's first instinct was immediate and familiar. She could solve this. Her foundation could step in, provide the funding, ensure that Iris's opportunity wasn't lost due to circumstances beyond her control. The solution was obvious and well within her capabilities. But then she caught herself, remembering months of therapy discussions about the difference between helping and managing, between supporting and controlling. "Dr. Martinez, does Iris know you're calling me?" "No, but I thought maybe your foundation could." "I can't make funding decisions without talking to Iris and Rowan first," Serenity interrupted gently. "But I'd like to help if there's a way to do that appropriately." "Where are they now?" "At the aquarium." Iris wanted to practice her presentation one more time, even though it feels pointless now. 20 minutes later, Serenity stood outside the Marine Research Lab, where she had first learned about Iris's coral regeneration project. Through the glass she could see Iris at her computer, shoulders slumped in defeat, while Rowan sat beside her with his hand on her back in quiet support. Serenity knocked softly, and both looked up with surprise when they saw her. "Dr. Martinez called me," she said simply. "I heard about the Henderson Foundation situation. I'm sorry, I know how much this opportunity meant to you." Iris's eyes filled with tears. 6 months of work, and now it's all for nothing. "It's not for nothing," Serenity said, moving into the lab but maintaining a respectful distance. "Your research is solid, and your presentation will be excellent regardless of who's in the audience." Rowan watched her carefully, clearly surprised by her presence but not unwelcoming. "We'll figure something out," he said. "There are other funding sources." "I know you will," Serenity agreed. "You always do. But I wanted to ask if there's any way I could help with tomorrow's presentation specifically."
"What do you mean?" Iris asked. "Well, you've prepared an amazing presentation that showcases groundbreaking research. Instead of canceling it just because the Henderson Foundation can't attend, what if we found other people who should see your work?" Serenity looked at Rowan, making sure he was comfortable with where this was heading. "I know several environmental foundation directors, marine biology department heads, and corporate sustainability officers who would be fascinated by your coral regeneration research. If you're open to it, I could make some calls and see if anyone would be interested in attending tomorrow's presentation." "You would do that?" Iris asked. "Only if you and your dad think it's a good idea," Serenity said carefully. "I don't want to impose or take over your opportunity, but if you'd like me to help expand your audience, I'd be honored to support your presentation that way." Rowan studied her face, and Serenity could see him processing this different approach. She wasn't solving their problem or providing funding directly. She was offering to use her network to create opportunities while leaving all the decisions in their hands. "What would that look like exactly?" Rowan asked. "I'd reach out to my contacts, explain that there's a brilliant young researcher presenting tomorrow, and invite them to attend if they're interested. No promises about funding, no pressure to commit to anything, just an opportunity for more people to see Iris's work and make their own decisions about whether they want to support it." Iris looked at her father. "Dad, what do you think?" "I think," Rowan said slowly, "that having more people see your research is always a good thing. And I appreciate that Serenity is offering to help us expand our opportunities rather than trying to solve our problems for us." The comment carried weight beyond the immediate situation, acknowledging the growth that had happened during their time apart. "Okay," Iris said, her enthusiasm beginning to return. "Let's do it." Serenity spent the next 3 hours making phone calls and sending emails, carefully framing the invitation as an opportunity to witness innovative research rather than a request for funding support. By late evening she had secured attendance from representatives of 4 different foundations, 2 university research departments and 3 corporate environmental programs. "No promises about outcomes," she reminded Iris as they reviewed the updated attendee list. "But you'll have a room full of people who are genuinely interested in marine conservation. This is actually better than just the Henderson Foundation," Iris realized. More diverse perspectives, more potential pathways for collaboration. As they prepared to leave the aquarium, Rowan caught Serenity's arm gently. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This was exactly the kind of support we needed." "Thank you for letting me help," Serenity replied, "and for trusting me to do it appropriately." They looked at each other for a long moment, both recognizing that something had shifted between them, but neither ready to name it yet. Tomorrow would be Iris's day to shine,
but tonight had been Serenity's opportunity to prove that she had learned the difference between supporting someone's success and controlling their circumstances. The Marine Research Lab was packed beyond capacity the next morning, with people standing along the walls as Iris prepared to present her coral regeneration research. Serenity sat in the back row, watching as the teenager she had grown to love stood confidently before an audience of marine biologists, foundation directors, and environmental researchers. Traditional coral restoration focuses on transplanting existing specimens, Iris began, her voice clear and confident despite the pressure. But my approach creates custom habitat structures designed specifically for the environmental conditions of each restoration site. As Iris moved through her presentation, demonstrating the 3D printed structures and explaining the symbiotic relationships she had cultivated, Serenity felt a profound sense of pride mixed with something deeper. This brilliant young woman was achieving her dreams through her own merit, her own preparation, her own courage. All Serenity had done was ensure the right people were in the room to witness it. The implications for large-scale reef restoration are significant, Iris continued, clicking to her final slide. This approach could accelerate recovery timelines from decades to years while creating more resilient ecosystem structures. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. During the question period that followed, it became clear that Iris had not only impressed her audience, but had genuinely excited them about the possibilities her research represented. Dr. Sarah Kim from the Pacific Marine Foundation was the first to approach afterward. "Iris, this is extraordinary work. We'd like to discuss funding your Caribbean field trials as part of our Young Researcher Initiative." Within 30 minutes, Iris had received 3 concrete funding offers and invitations to present at 2 major marine biology conferences. The research opportunity that had seemed lost just 24 hours earlier had transformed into something bigger and more comprehensive than originally planned. Rowan watched his daughter navigate these conversations with growing amazement. She fielded technical questions with expertise, discussed collaboration possibilities with maturity, and maintained her enthusiasm while staying grounded about the work ahead. "She's incredible," Serenity said quietly, appearing beside him as they watched Iris explain her methodology to yet another interested researcher. "She really is," Rowan agreed. "Thank you for making this possible. Not the funding, she earned that herself, but for giving her the platform to show what she's capable of." "That's all she ever needed," Serenity replied. "Someone to believe in her work enough to put it in front of the right people." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as Dr. Martinez introduced Iris to representatives from Northwestern University's marine biology program. The girl who had spent years volunteering at tanks and conducting research in a small lab was now being treated as a peer by established scientists. "Serenity," Rowan said, turning to face her fully. "We should talk." "I know," she replied. "When you're ready." "I'm ready now." They found a quiet corner of the aquarium's main gallery, surrounded by the gentle sounds of water and the soft lighting that made everything feel dreamlike. Other visitors moved past them, but they created their own intimate space in the midst of the public setting. "I've been thinking about us," Rowan began, "about what happened and what I've learned since then." "I've been thinking too," Serenity said. "And learning. I started therapy after our fight. Really, I realized that my problem wasn't just how I handled the fellowship situation. My problem was that I didn't know how to be in a relationship with someone without trying to manage their experience." Rowan nodded slowly. "I've been learning things too, about how my pride sometimes gets in the way of accepting help, even when it's offered with genuine love." "I should have talked to you first," Serenity said. "About the fellowship, about Iris's funding needs, about everything. I was so focused on solving the problem that I forgot you were supposed to be my partner in approaching it, and I should have recognized that your impulse to help came from caring about us, not from thinking we were incapable," Rowan replied. "I let my insecurities about providing for Iris cloud my judgment about your intentions." They were quiet for a moment, watching a school of fish move in synchronized patterns through the tank beside them. "What you did yesterday," Rowan continued, "the way you supported Iris's presentation without taking over or trying to control the outcome, that showed me you understand the difference now." "I'm still learning," Serenity admitted, "but I want to learn. I want to figure out how to be part of a family without losing myself or trying to manage everyone else." "Is that what you want?" Rowan asked. "To be part of our family?" Serenity felt tears threaten, but they were good tears this time. "More than anything, if you'll have me." Rowan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and familiar, the yarn bracelet Iris had made months earlier, the one that was supposed to replace Serenity's broken silver bracelet. "Iris wanted me to give this to you," he said. "She said it represents the connections that hold people together even when they're not perfect." Serenity accepted the bracelet with shaking hands, slipping it onto her wrist alongside her mother's repaired silver chain. "Tell me this isn't too late." "It's not too late," Rowan said, pulling her into his arms. "If anything, we're just getting started." 1 year later, Serenity stood in the newly opened Estmere Center for Young Environmental Scientists, a collaboration between NextGen Dynamics and the Shed Aquarium. Iris was presenting her published research to a group of middle school students, her confidence and expertise evident in every gesture. "The ocean needs young scientists who think differently," Iris was saying, "who see problems as opportunities, and who aren't afraid to try new approaches." Rowan appeared beside Serenity, slipping his arm around her waist as they watched his daughter inspire the next generation of researchers. He wore a new title now, Director of Facilities Innovation at NextGen, where his predictive maintenance systems had revolutionized building management efficiency. Any regrets? He asked quietly. Serenity looked around the center, filled with young people asking eager questions about marine biology and environmental conservation. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a trapped elevator, to separation, to this moment of shared purpose and genuine partnership. None, she said, touching both bracelets on her wrist. We rose from the ashes, just like my mother always said we could. All of us, Rowan agreed, watching as Iris fielded questions with the kind of joy that comes from pursuing your true passion. Together. Outside the center's floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan stretched toward the horizon, its depths holding mysteries that future scientists would discover. But inside, surrounded by the family they had built through choice and commitment, and the willingness to keep trying, Serenity finally understood what it meant to be truly home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.